Hello, everyone, and welcome to another evening of Straight Talk with the Connecticut Science Center. This is a program in our Science Straight Up series where we invite scientists, science communicators, and community leaders to share their expertise and experiences with us in exciting and in engaging ways. My name is Amy Saylor, and I'm delighted to host tonight's program from the Mashantucket Pequot Museum and Research Center here in Ledyard, Connecticut. If you enjoyed the program this evening, and we hope you do, please consider supporting our mission by making a donation at ctsciencecenter.org or by texting Love Science to 44321. Before we dive in, I just want to give our viewers a brief roadmap of how the evening will play out. We'll begin with a talk entitled Ancient Wisdom in Modern Medicine, the 5M Model for Wellness. Then we'll learn a little about how familiar plants are used medicinally. Lastly, a special presentation of song and dance, a staple for the cultural and social well-being of the Mashantucket community to this day. Because we want to hear from you, our viewers, we'll host an audience Q&A towards the end of the evening, facilitated by my colleague, Tyler Green. He'll be monitoring your thoughts and reactions to what you're hearing and seeing throughout the evening, so if you have questions, be sure to type them in the chat, or for those of you joining us in person, be sure to write your questions on the index card you received upon your arrival, and we'll do our very best to address them at the end. Let's begin. As the inaugural Chief Medical Officer of the Mashantucket Pequot Tribal Nation, directing all Mashantucket healthcare initiatives, including oversight of the Tribal Health Service, Behavioral, Employee, and Community Health Service grants, Dr. Setu Vora is a published author, speaker, and practicing physician with board certifications in the specialties of internal medicine, pulmonary diseases, critical care medicine, and sleep medicine. He trained at the University of Connecticut and subsequently at the New York Weill Cornell Medical Center. Prior to joining the Mashantucket Pequot Tribal Nation, he led quality improvement and patient safety initiatives at Hartford Healthcare. Welcome, Dr. Vora.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you, Amy. I want to thank the Mashantucket Pequot Tribal Nation for hosting this incredible opportunity to display the ancient wisdom and modern medicine right here on the ancestral lands of Mashantucket. I want to thank the Connecticut Science Center for also collaborating with us on this excellent initiative. So I'm just the opening act for the stars that will follow after me. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Pequot Museum and to the Mashantucket Pequot Tribal Nation. October 11th was designated as the Indigenous Day, the Indigenous Peoples Day. And coming up on October 18th is the Federal Recognition Day for the Mashantucket Pequot Tribe. Wonderful time ahead. November happens to be the Native American Heritage Month, which we'll celebrate as well. So once again, we could not do this without the collaboration with the Connecticut Science Center, so thank you for that. We want to thank the viewers out there. Please support science. We need it more than anything else, especially like we learned during the pandemic, even before that. And special thanks to the Indigenous leaders that will display and really showcase the lived experience of storytelling, music, and dance that forms part and parcel of the whole wellness package. Many folks already know about the Native American contribution to medicine. Many of you might have heard of the discovery invention of syringes, which first happened on Turtle Island. The Native American folks were the first pioneers in pain relief, both in terms of use of the willow bark, which is the same active ingredient we find in aspirin, the salicylate, or the topical analgesics from pepper, the so-called capsaicin cream that you may have used for your arthritic joints as well. But that's not the real major contribution amongst many. Those are amazing, including even oral contraception. The real value of the native culture in modern medicine is the tremendous assets that they have shared around prevention. And my job today is to just share with you my take on the indigenous cultures, both here at Mashantucket and throughout the Indian country in US, and indigenous communities across the world that have the same thread of prevention running in their DNA. So this is what we'll do today. We'll go through outlining the problem, and then we'll look at the consequences of that on our health and well-being. Finally, we'll start looking at the indigenous way of life that may instruct us in our own journeys through this earth. And finally, we'll recap that with the 5M model for the rest of us. This is a journey. And as we have evolved over eons, we have noticed that, our ancestral lifestyle was more physical, more outdoors. It was more hunting, gathering, foraging, which then led on to the agricultural revolution, followed by the industrial revolution. Now we are in the age of the technological revolution, and it's hard to find anyone without a tether that is some sort of a screen. And thanks to the pandemic, we are doing this event through such technology medium. So it is a tool, but we can all appreciate that technology has, to a large degree, taken over our lives, both in positive way and oftentimes in a significant negative impact to our health and well-being. The indigenous folks, indigenous people of the land, have survived a massive genocide throughout the period of colonial contact and beyond. And what was transmitted was the trauma. At the same time, what was also transmitted was the strength. And how may we learn from that shared experience in our own lives is one of the purposes of today's presentation. We have tremendous amount of processed foods around us. Unfortunately, the big industrial revolution and the big food has created easy access to cheap, extremely tasty, and frankly addictive, highly processed food all around us. Many communities that we know of are essentially in a food desert, where finding locally grown, healthy nutrients is harder than access to easily packaged, highly processed food. At the same time, the consumption of highly processed media is exponentially higher as well. We spend over, I won't say how many hours, both at work and in recreation, staring at screen and essentially consuming a lot of media that comes at us. There's a lot of sensory overload. There is oftentimes less verification of that information that comes at us. Many of these algorithms select the content that resonates with our intrinsic biases, leading to more of a confirmation bias. And we have a shaped and a warped worldview due to that imbalance of our mental nutrition through media. And that leads to more of a sedentary lifestyle, which was not made any easier through the pandemic. As when it comes to COVID-19, perhaps the 19 stands for some 19 pounds that myself and a few other folks that I know might have gained over the last 2 years. Having said that, there's still hope. And that certainly begins with starting to be kind to ourselves and recommitting to making a difference in our own individual life and then around us in our family and beyond. We know that lifestyle factors that we just talked about, sedentary lifestyle, increasing stress, depression, anxiety due to these major changes in our neurohormonal chemistry, certainly processed food, changing our gut microbiome, all those lead to acceleration of disease states.
Yes.
So much so that 7 out of the top 10 killer disease in the United States, and perhaps even worldwide, are
Hari.
perfectly preventable with lifestyle modification.
But it's on TV.
And my hypothesis to present to you tonight is that we just have to remind ourselves of the ancestral ways, look at the indigenous way of living, to perhaps reverse the damage that we do with our modern lifestyle. These killer diseases are very familiar to you. They include cardiovascular, heart disease, cancers. Certainly, it includes neurodegenerative disease such as Alzheimer's, dementia, and stroke. And of course, COPD, emphysema, due to the ravages of smoking and industrial pollution. All these are certainly preventable to a large extent. If you had to take one message home, I would say it's one of this slide, that the central condition that drives the disease state is something called SCI. And the SCI stands for systemic chronic inflammation. Essentially, there's a corrosive fire, a low-grade fire that burns in our body, which is triggered by various conditions, such as chronic infections, physical inactivity, increased body mass index, change in our gut flora, our diet to a large extent, isolation, stress, mental health issues, substance use, including cigarette smoke, disturbed sleep rhythm. All of this leads to a state of chronic inflammation. And that drives the change in our hormones. It changes our microbiome, the internal flora that acts essentially like another endocrine organ. And the result of that is increased stress reaction and atherosclerosis, degenerative diseases that lead to metabolic disease such as type 2 diabetes, heart attack, stroke, cancers, dementia, even loss of muscle strength and osteoporosis. So the central key factor that we need to reverse somehow or slow down progression is the SCI, systemic chronic inflammation. And the 5M model, which is what we learn from the indigenous communities, both here and across the world, is a natural prescription of prevention. The first of the 5M is menu. We are what we eat, that is for sure. And big food has, as we talked about, not made our job easier to access healthy nutrients. Many communities struggle with this. And even at the brain level, highly processed food, fast food, triggers the same dopamine release that acts as an addictive loop of habit. Our ancestors, local indigenous communities know the value of growing our own food. They enjoyed local, seasonal, and whole foods filled with phytochemicals, nutrients, and we'll learn more about that from our star presenters following me. And this is the story of the three sisters that many of you know really well. There's a harmony of symphony of growing certain plants together that has symbiotic relationship to allow better growth. At the same time, they complement nutritionally as well. So when you combine beans with squash and corn, those are the sacred three sisters that the Pequot tribe and many other tribal nations across Indian country really value. And that's just one example of promoting more local, organic, pesticide-free nutrient growth. Michael Pollan and many other experts in nutrition have mentioned this before, that enjoy the plant, but if it is made in the plant, avoid it. One other thing they've mentioned is that eat foods that our great-great-grandmoms would recognize, and not something out of a package that they would not know what that's all about. Simple advice, highly relevant to all of us. And I grew up in India. I was born there. I I grew up there. I came here in the US back in 1998. And I grew up with ancient Indian cultural values without even knowing that that's what I'm growing up with. But I remember my grandparents and my parents always taking a few grains of rice and spreading it out around their plate and bowing their head and mumbling some prayer that I did not understand back then before each meal. And we see this reverence for food, certainly in indigenous culture and many other cultures that we are all familiar with. And how may we reconnect with that spirituality of consuming our nutrients is at the heart of this proverb that before eating, always take time to thank the food. The second keystone prevention in the 5M model is the mind. Our mind is a wonderful thing, as we all know. And we are faced with an onslaught of stimulants, both visual, auditory. At the same time, we have a lot of substances around us, both legal and illegal, that certainly makes our mind very complex. When you are faced with trauma, both historical trauma and ongoing trauma, it leaves a scar that results in a post-traumatic stress disorder, certainly increases anxiety and depression. And that leads to many of the manifestations that we see in our body as well, because the mind and the body obviously are linked with the spirit as well. And how may we reset that? And we turn back to the indigenous cultures for lessons. The relevance and sacred focus on nature and the seasons, the ceremonial and celebratory fire, the reverence for sun and the moon, the sage or frankincense, any kind of olfactory positive stimuli, certainly being out in nature, being one with nature, all these are ways and means to disengage the mind from a negative cycle loop and refocus on healing and growth. And how may we incorporate that in our daily life now? That certainly is something for us to think about. When it comes to mind, ancient wisdom and best practices are all outlined here. And we also have to remember that we are all interconnected. And that's another big lesson that our indigenous communities have taught us. The third keystone habit in the 5M model is move. Our ancestors lived a fairly active lifestyle. They did not have the luxury of 9-to-5 desk-bound job. It just happens to be actually deleterious to our health. So sitting has become, in a sense, the new smoking as well. And as you can see, movement does not require access to gym or Peloton sponsorship or membership. It can be done in outdoors with a dog, walking the dog, or dancing, as we'll see with our experts following shortly. Any movement has been shown to reduce the stress hormone, improve the cardiovascular function, improve the blood vessel function, reduce insulin resistance, and actually improve mood as well, using our own endorphin biochemical systems. Simple prescription, over the counter, no side effect. The ceremonial and the community aspect of being together in movement, combined with the power of music and the rhythm, adds another distinct element of joy and creativity as well. And you'll have the chance to witness that shortly. And this movement is certainly good for both the mind, body, and spirit. And it brings joy and deepens the connection with ourselves and with others around us. Fourth is make. Human beings, we have an intrinsic ability and a need to create, almost in the image of the creators, whichever one we pray to. And that creativity drives our engagement, and it has been shown to certainly be, multifaceted. It can be a wall art, rock art, as seen in this from the Grand Canyon indigenous people. It can be the mindfulness of the weaving of the basket. It can take the form of harvesting shells, the quahogs or the wampums, from the shore and the ocean, and with the labor of love, transforming it into an object of reverence, gratitude, and gift. It can also be making music or the instrument, and we have some experts who do both. They make the music and they craft the instrument here at the tribe as well. Those are all forms of prayer, of mindfulness, the act of making, that has been shown to have tremendous health benefits, both physical and mental. It doesn't have to be an object. Perhaps it could be a short poetry or a haiku. It could be making a business plan. Any act of creation results in the same benefit. So I won't go into all the 12 benefits of creativity that we have outlined here on this slide. But suffice it to say that the act of making creates health, happiness or joy, deep joy, a sense of purpose and meaning. And the final M in the 5M model is meet. We are literally better off together. As a society, we're becoming more connected through virtual, but in real life, we are disengaged with ourselves, sometimes with our own immediate family and friends. And of course, in the pandemic, we have a valid reason to do so. But certainly that has led to a sense of isolation and perhaps a pervasive sense of loneliness as well. And why is it relevant? It is relevant because the act of meeting other like-minded folks and others who may not agree with our viewpoints informs discussion, growth, and sometimes even discomfort. But in that, there is growth as well. We divide our sorrows and we multiply our joys when we are together with folks instead of by ourselves. And mind you, loneliness is not the same as the bliss of solitude, where you may choose to be by yourself and be perfectly at peace and happy. That's a different and perhaps even a divine state. But that feeling of isolation that is corrosive to the mind and body is what we want to avoid by the act of meeting. Because the science and research in modern medicine is clear. Loneliness and social isolation leads to almost 30% higher risk of heart disease, strokes, and cancer, and almost 50% higher risk of overall all cause of death or functional decline or dementia. Powerful numbers that we would not think of that as a common risk factor, but social isolation, loneliness matters. Check up on friends and family, neighbors, perhaps that might help them get through the day and even the year. So in summary, small habits start with single small step. Big dreams start with single step that go on to become short-term and long-term goals that ultimately results in fulfillment of a joyous dream. If it comes to menu, perhaps how may we consider adding 1 or 2 more servings of vegetables a day? Do it for a day or 2 and slowly increase that plant-based intake. When it comes to mind, is it possible for us to reduce our screen time by 10% this week? Small steps, but in the right direction. Is it possible to sit less at work and stand more and walk more, perhaps even in nature? When it comes to making, doesn't matter what we make, as long as we keep creating and reinventing ourselves, we are on the right journey as we learn from our ancestral practices. And finally, we share and we meet with others so that we can celebrate our journeys individually and collectively as well. So that's the 5M model of prevention and wellness that the ancient indigenous communities have shared with us. And I wanted to bring that in discussion with you to show that these ancestral ancient practices do have a biological basis. There's a clear-cut research-based evidence that show how they result in positive health outcomes that we just shared. So now we see that come alive in action through lived experience. And at this point, I want to thank all of you, and please welcome our Native leaders who will demonstrate these lived experience through Indigenous eyes. So it's my pleasure to welcome Nakai Norton. Thank you, Nakai.
Good evening, everyone. Katapatiamu, thank you all for coming and spending this evening with us. My talk is on Earth's medicine and local plant life. I'm a member of the Mashantucket Pequot tribe, and I'm also Narragansett. And I was very fortunate to grow up with a lot of strong elders who forced me to stay outside. When the sun came up, it was time for me to go out, and I had no option but to come back for food. But other than that, you were staying outside till the sun went down. And that's a practice that I'm working on with my children today as a father now, is having them involved in the outdoors. And an indigenous perspective on land, we don't believe in ownership of the land. We believe we are the land. And that's because when we pass on, when we are done with this life, we go back to the earth and we quite literally become this land. So our ancestors quite literally are this land all around us. Right now here in Mashantucket, this is the oldest continuously occupied reservation in North America, but that's when the King of England decided to give us this chunk of land in 1666. My people have been here far longer than that and have really found a way to thrive and live off this land. And through oppression and through different things, we fought and we have been able to maintain our traditional ways, and being able to pass it down to the younger generation is what I thrive to do, and this what I love to do. So I'm gonna give you guys some examples of my childhood and what I learned growing up, and some of my favorite plants in the area. One that is at the top of the list is jewelweed. So being in the woods a lot, I got poison ivy often. And I got it bad. I'd be itchy all over the place, and my grandparents would go down and they'd go by the water's edge, and there's a plant that grows there called jewelweed. And if you take that plant and you pick it and you hold it underwater on the backside, the bottom of that leaf has a silver shine to it. So that's why they call it jewelweed. And you grind up that jewelweed and you'll place it on your rash, your itch, and it will eliminate that itch. Another one is witch hazel, which I literally just picked witch hazel about a week ago because my wife got poison ivy. And you take it and you boil it down and you get that astringent out and you're able to rub it in. You can add it to creams and it does its job. And one thing about indigenous people we live a seasonal lifestyle traditionally. 500 years ago, we didn't have the option to go to Stop and Shop and get blueberries whenever we wanted them. We couldn't go get anything whenever we wanted. We had to wait for it to come into season. There's 13 full moons in a year, and each full moon represents something is ripe and ready for us to eat, or it's time for us to go do something. And we have Thanksgivings for these, and it's not, the idea of Thanksgiving coming up with your turkey and your cranberry sauce, but you're thankful that this crop is here. If you had to wait a year for a blueberry, you're going to be pretty excited for when it's ripe and ready to pick. And so we have celebrations and we get our people together. We have harvest and ceremony songs that we sing to honor these plants for their homecoming. And it is a practice that we do today here in the Mashantucket community and all over the East Coast and Indian country as a whole. And let me see where I'm at. Mind. This is our way of life. This isn't something that, you read in a book. This is something that is taught to you. And these foods, these plants, these objects are meant for human consumption. They're meant for our ways of life. They're meant for us to harvest. And in turn, we are stewards to this land. We protect them. And there's more than just plants that you use for, topical uses or ingestion. There's plants that you use to cure the spirit, to cure the mind, to cure the soul. And some really specific ones here for us are cedar, tobacco, sage, and sweetgrass. And they're often burned and they help cleanse the area for you. And we use them in our ceremonies. Another really popular one in this area is eastern white pine. Our forests all over here are filled with eastern white pines. And if you gather those pine needles and you have a sore throat, you're not feeling well, you can get a bundle of those pine needles. You can identify a white pine by it will have a bundle of 5, whereas a red pine will have a bundle of 3, which will be RED, a white pine, WHITE. You grab a bundle of those pine needles and you soak them and you boil them and you make a tea. Not too popular today because it tastes like pine needles, and I know you guys like Earl Greys and things like that. But it gets the job done and it really helps, and it's something I still make for my children to this day. Another real favorite, which it's a fungus and it's not a plant, but the mushroom season is booming here in Mashantucket and all over New England right now. And my family are going wild and they're really loving it because this year we're getting a lot of rain. And after a good rain, you'll find us in the woods. My coworker, Connor, who's going to be coming up shortly, we go and sneak out on our lunch break to go look for mushrooms after all this rain. And we were fortunate to find 50 pounds of mushrooms just last week alone. The area is filled with mushrooms. We have chicken of the woods, which is an orangey yellow mushroom that'll grow on oak shelves. Hen of the woods, which will roost on the bottom of an oak tree. We have puffballs are what they're called, and they kind of look like a soccer ball. Black trumpets, oysters, the variety is unreal. And this season has been fantastic. So I encourage any one of you who like to go take hikes and get out and walk to look around for mushrooms, look what's around. There's plenty of foraging pages where you can get insight and make sure you're eating the safe mushroom and not eating a poisonous, because there are lookalikes and things along those lines. But growing up as a kid, this was a common practice. They'd give us a basket on our back and we'd be off in the woods after a rainy day and we'd be harvesting. And then you get to really spend time with family in the meantime, because you have to process all those 50 pounds of mushrooms and you have to pick them apart and you have to boil them. Then you get to season them up any way you'd like. A real common way for my family, which they might attack me for after this, for giving out our recipe, but it's onions, peppers, and garlic, tomato sauce, and that's all I'm gonna give you guys, because anything further, they might come after me. The important thing about all of this, though, is passing it on to the next generations, is teaching them the resources that this land has. This land has been clear cut. This land has gone through so much, yet it still offers so much. So teaching our younger generations to respect this land, and that if you are giving offerings to this land and you're taking care of this land, it'll forever take care of you. Same with our oceans. We believe the ocean has a spirit, and my people call it Pumpagussit, and that's my Narragansett people. And we always pray for safety, because the ocean also offers tons of plant life to us in forms of seaweed, which we use for our clam bakes, and it's filled with our shellfish and all our different wildlife that we're able to harvest. And over hundreds of years of overfishing and pollution, you can still go to the Long Island Sound and prepare a meal for many people, and it continues to do so day after day. So my message to everyone is to be a steward. Take the time to go out and walk your local forest, take a walk through the park, get out and look what's around you. Take the time to study and research what you can use, because the land will forever offer you gifts. So in this time, I want to thank you all, and I also want to bring Connor up now, and we're going to have our Mashantucket royalty. You guys are in for a treat. We have some royalty here, and we're going to hear some good music.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for coming today. And I want to thank the Mashantucket Pequot Tribal Nation for allowing us to be able to have an event like this. When it comes to singing and dancing and the well-being of a tribal community, it's really important to have song and dance as a part of your daily life and your daily routine. Comparing it to Dr. Vera's model, the 5M model, it's very obvious as how movement is really important to dance. It's the fundamental structure of the entirety of the dance. But other than just movement, making is really important when it comes to dancing. You have to make your regalia, you have to create your dance style, your own individual step, something that makes your movement unique to everybody else's. And when you're making your regalia, you put a lot of prayer and a lot of thought into how you want to represent yourself spiritually and to the remainder of the community. This has a lot of effect not only on yourself and the mind of yourself and the well-being of your own mind, but as we're going to experience a little bit later tonight, it has a residual effect on the community around you. When people watch dancers dance and hear the singers sing, it brings that feeling to their heart and it brings that happiness to their mind. But we also have to think about where these events are going on. And the vast majority of this traditional dance is done at either ceremonies or community celebrations and meetings. And it's a beautiful thing for the community to get together and to be able to heal with one another. That's something that people here in Mashantucket have been doing for thousands of years, is getting together to sing and dance and heal and spend time with one another. And at these events, of course, you would be eating your traditional foods, you would be spending time with one another and really creating a prayer that would be able to be infectious and be really positive for everybody around you. And I think the best way to experience that is literally and to be around the song and the dance of the local community. So I would like to introduce the tribal royalty here. I'd like to introduce Janiyah Sebastian, the Little Miss Mashantucket, Michaela Allen, Junior Mashantucket, and Priyana Boyd, Miss Mashantucket, and I'd like for them to come up and talk a little bit more, introduce themselves, and introduce their dance style. Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Natessa Priyana. My name is Priyana. I'm this year's 2021-2022 Miss Mashantucket. And today we will be dancing the Eastern Blanket Dance. This dance symbolizes a woman's vitality of wisdom and strength that tells the story of how a woman changes throughout her life. At the beginning of the dance, she will have her blanket wrapped around her body with her arms and her head tucked down. She is shy and scared about the responsibilities she will have. Then she will slowly get more confident. The blanket spreads out and spins and wraps it around her body to attract potential suitors, all while keeping steady and graceful footwork. Eventually, her moves become more and more lively. On the final drum beat, the woman throws the blanket on the ground to show she is ready to take on the next stage of her life.
Here, come over here.
My name is Janiyah Sebastian. Her name is Janiyah Sebastian, and she is Miss
Mashantucket.
Little Miss Mashantucket.
Natasuis Michaela Allen. I'm Junior Miss Mashantucket.
So one thing I want everybody to experience is how infectious the power of song and dance is firsthand. So we're going to sing a song in the community's language, and we're going to have the royalty dance to our song.
Wake up, oh, damn, wake up. right, wow. If you could be here in the room and feel the reverberations of the drum and the voices. We're going to reset real quick. My name is Tyler. I'll be back with the audience Q&A in just a minute. So we will be right back. Remember to send those questions in the chat if you have them. All right, welcome back, everybody. Thank you for that wonderful performance and for the presentations before that as well. So we're going to get into our audience Q&A now. Thank you to our viewers for your engagement and for your viewership throughout. I've collected some note cards and some notes here that we're going to go through. We're going to get to as many as we can, and please continue to send them in. Thank you, gentlemen, for sticking around to help answer some of these questions. So the first one, Dr. Vora, you talked about one of the 5 M's being food. Right? Food obviously doesn't start with an M, but generally your diet,
Menu.
your meals.
Yeah.
And so this question is about the combinations of food. So you talked about the benefits of the 3 sisters. Is that what they're called? But if you could craft for us perhaps the perfect meal, incorporating those sorts of foods, that is also healthy, and that perhaps people would have access to the ingredients from the local, from their local shops, what might that be?
Thank you for that question. And I'm still learning. And I have some experts I can refer and call the lifeline question line 2.
Yeah.
But one challenge for me is to get beyond labeling something as good or bad. Certainly everything in moderation perhaps would be the wise answer. And if you're generally healthy, follow the nutritious whole food advice that we hear about. Some folks recommend more of a Mediterranean style diet. If that works for you, that's great. But I think heritage and cultural diet that is good and that you love and you enjoy, food is more than just fuel. And how do we get to the point where we start enjoying it in moderation and eat mostly whole food that is not processed? We can get past the labels. That's just my take on it. I'm still learning. It's a work in progress. Nakai, and other thoughts?
For a meal using 3 sisters ingredients, the go-to has to be succotash, which is corn, beans, and then really any meat you want to add to it. Typically in this area, traditionally we're going to use corn, beans, and then we're going to use a smoked fish, either bluefish, striper, or tautog.
Connor, did you want to add anything to that on the topic of food?
One of the best things that I think that people could eat is the food that they find naturally, that they forage themselves. I think that nature is the best producer of our foods. I think they produce a lot higher quality foods than your standard farm. When you go into the woods and you find natural food, you hunt for your meat. I think that's one of the best ways to maintain a healthy diet.
Yeah, I love the point about thinking about food as more than just fuel. Perhaps you encounter this in your practice, but I think the sort of modern diet industry, the notion is to think about food as, if not fuel, but at least the numbers that it represents in terms of cutting calories or something like that. But perhaps people would be better served as thinking about it as more than just the numbers. Excellent. Okay, so Nakai, sort of direct this one at you here, but of course, the others can say something about it too. So you talked about your childhood being tremendously influential and how you approach your life and your work. What are some of the simple things that folks can do with their kids fitting into a busy day, that they're not giving up soccer practice or something or schoolwork, so that they might connect with some of the sorts of experiences that you described?
Look out their window. Look what's around them in their yard. The trees and life that's going on right around them. I'd imagine most people are going to have some type of tree in their yard, an oak tree, a pine tree, and that's going to have a use. And that's going to be a home to something. There's going to be some type of animal, learn the life cycle. We homeschool my children, and my daughter will go outside and she'll grab an oak leaf, she'll grab pine needles, she'll grab the hickory nuts that are falling off the trees, and we'll bring them back in and we'll learn about the life cycle. So that is huge because those are all resources that, you know, you'll see every day, but you won't acknowledge that they're right there for you.
Absolutely. I'll add where, you know, this is where if you have a family member or a neighbor who can guide you into that natural exploration, that's ideal. But if you don't have one handy, I use an app called iNaturalist. It's a National Geographic app. Take a picture and I query the system, gives me option, and I find out what's it all about, and I can dive deeper. So there is opportunities and learning at every point. We need to open our eyes and hearts for that.
I think that one of the things that parents could do to help benefit their children in learning about other ways of life that they may not have necessarily experienced before is to be open to diversity and to introduce your children to communities and people that they may not normally be in contact with. To really be able to learn about one another is, I think, one of the best ways that people can raise their children.
Excellent. I'm going to follow that up with a, perhaps, so it's not to denigrate it, but a perhaps less profound question, but no less important. And that is, how can you tell if a mushroom is poisonous? If we're going to encourage people to go out and forage for them.
That is a fantastic question. So growing up, I was only taught the ones that you could eat rather than having to learn all the ones you can eat and the ones you can't. Today, I've versed myself a little bit more because it's good to know. But Google actually has an app where you can just take a picture of the mushroom and it will give you the breakdown on if it's safe or not. A lot of times you're looking on the underside to make sure there's gills and certain marks around the stem. And fortunately for us in the area, we have some very prominent ones that are edible. So they grow in large proportions and large sizes. So I would encourage always having a backup. So always referencing with someone if this isn't something you do regularly. So there's plenty of foraging groups on social media that you're able to join and add. And if you see one, you can snap a picture on it and add it right on there. And they're really quick on getting back to you. And then Google also has the app where you can just take a photo of different plants and mushrooms as well, and it'll identify it for you.
Yeah, and I think what you guys have said that, you know, you can get all the benefits of, you know, engaging with nature by foraging for them. You don't necessarily have to eat the mushrooms that you
Absolutely. And it is awfully rewarding as well to, you know, harvest your own meal. So if you are to go out and eat them, if you are going fishing, it's something that my kids love if they're able to catch a fish or find a mushroom that we're cooking something that they provided for the family.
Yeah, that's great. This one is maybe directed more towards you, Connor. Our dancers have now joined the audience, but and of course, others can answer this as well. Where are those tribal dances taught? Or of course the music and the singing as well. You can answer this personally or perhaps in general. Is there formal training or, you know, where did you learn this sort of thing?
I think if you want to learn traditional music and traditional dance, the best way would be to get in contact with the communities who were responsible for bringing those songs and dances to life. It's I wouldn't recommend learning from a book. I wouldn't recommend learning from the internet. The best way to learn about a song and a dance that's not yours is by asking the community directly, because anything shy of that is reaching towards appropriation, which people really don't want to be committing here. So if you want to learn more about song, if you want to learn more about dance, reach out to your local indigenous communities and they would be happy to share the things that they are willing to share with you.
And also the dances, you can teach to an extent, the basic footwork and the idea, but the dancing is an expression of self, an expression of each individual. So they're going to always add in their own little flair and touch to it as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've emphasized the importance of lived experience throughout, and I think to your point, Connor, that's really the way to learn it. Okay, let's see. What else do we have here? So, Dr. Vora, do you have do you have a sense of how prevalent the sort of thinking that you've, you know, expounded on this evening is among your colleagues in the medical community? You know, are there people out there sort of talking about the same things that you are? or are you sort of, is this a message that you find yourself talking about on all fronts, professionally and, to the public?
And Tyler, I believe that there are more subscribers to prevention than what we see. Most of us in healthcare actually trained in sick care. So essentially, more focus is around diagnosis, testing, and treatment once the condition has emerged. But at the same time, a sizable portion of all of our training goes towards going upstream and how may we start figuring out ways and means to prevent the disease from occurring in the first place. Oftentimes, just taking care of sick individuals and patients is too late to sometimes intervene, but it's never too late. Even when someone has a disease, there's always a chance to do secondary or tertiary prevention. And there are more colleagues of mine that also believe in the same prevention mindset.
Would you, recommend if folks, whoever their GP is, if they talk to them about the sorts of things?
Certainly. I think, if you only ask and engage and show interest in prevention, you'll probably get more than you asked for.
Excellent. Maybe a whole presentation. Excellent. All right, let's see, how are we doing on time here? So I have a couple more. So this is perhaps for all three of you. So to what extent is this, this frame of thinking, all the different aspects that we've been talking about, to what extent is it scalable? So in other words, can you talk about, perhaps each of you talk about how the 5N model moves from individual well-being to community, to society, and however far beyond that you'd like to go?
I'll start off by saying that when the tribe defines its objective 1 as the simple objective of its community having a healthier, happier, and longer life, that's a start. And how may we start looking at health in all policy? It can include, how do we design our programs? How do we make sure transportation is there to take people to their appointments? It's not just medical care, it's everything else around it. So it starts at the top with the governance, and we're very fortunate at the tribe to have a council that leads from the front. But that's just one aspect of it. And then you weave it into daily life that Connor and Nakai can share.
When it comes to song and dance and being scalable in its means of power, I think that the real thing that you have to look at is the power of prayer, and how song and dance is incredibly intertwined in that, especially within the local communities here. And when communities pray, a lot of the time they're not just praying immediately for themselves, but they're praying for everybody else around them. And that I believe that prayer is really infectious. I think it's something that could spread very easily among everybody around it and everybody.
What I'd like to add to it is it's all really a mindset. It's all, a huge part of this is mental, having that mental drive to make the change in your life, and include these steps into your life and add them into everyday life. And there's inspirations you can provide to people. This is something that I've had to implement in my life. I have completely changed my diet to a more traditional diet, and a big thing going around Indian country right now is food sovereignty, and getting back to eating foods that our bodies are meant to process, that we can really flow and get this vessel of ours moving at its peak and how it should be. And that's been something that has worked for myself, and I am always trying to promote it and push it for others, but it all is going to start in everyone else's individual mind. Everyone has to make that decision on their own to do this. And, it's hard. There's days where, I really want that Ben and Jerry's or I really want that piece of cheesecake, but, right. And you have to give yourself those days, but it's really that mindset and pushing through and that inner fight with yourself for your well-being.
Well, that's fantastic, and I think it's a good place to conclude. Gentlemen, this has been insightful, inspirational. I thank you all for your time and for your wisdom and your knowledge and sharing it all with us. I thank you to our viewers for your questions and for being with us this evening. Remember, if you do like this sort of programming, if you'd like to see more of it, please consider making a donation. You can go to ctsciencecenter.org, or you can text Love Science to 44321. And with that, thank you once again to our panelists here, our guests, and I'm going to throw it back to Amy to close us out. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tyler. All of what we've shared and experienced tonight would not be possible without the sponsorship of wonderful organizations like Connecticut Humanities. We thank you for your generous support of this collaborative effort between the Connecticut Science Center and our friends here at the Mashantucket Pequot Museum and Research Center. A special thank you to my Science Center colleagues, to our audience, both here and out there, and of course, thank you, Dr. Bora, Nakai, Connor, and the Mashantucket royalty for sharing your time, your energy, your spirit, and your wisdom. Thank you for joining us. Enjoy the remainder of your evening. Good night.